the way we structure our companies is designed to have good news flow upwards. Everyone wants to tell their boss they're doing a good job.
Yeah, true.
And what that means is that the default for an organization they're called high reliability organizations. The word safety is not in the title.
No, I noticed that.
And that's because they understand safety is the outcome. It's not, they really want near miss reports, where something could have gone terribly wrong, but they just got lucky. Most organizations, that information terrifies them because that's information telling them.
What if the systems designed to keep people safe are the very ones holding us back from true safety? In this episode of Building Doors, I sit down with Dr. Sean Brady, a forensic engineer, safety expert and founder of Brady Haywood Consulting, whose work spans complex and high-risk industries across Australia and beyond. Sean is known for the Brady Review into fatal accidents in mining, which expose systemic weaknesses and cultural blind spots that still shape how organisations think about safety. We explore how the way we design systems, set incentives and respond to failure can unintentionally create the very risks we aim to prevent. Sean shares why industries with exceptional safety records, like aviation, do not rely on compliance alone, but on feedback loops, humility and leaders willing to hear bad news early. This episode challenges long-held beliefs about safety metrics, project performance and leadership. It asks whether we are managing for safety or managing for appearance, and what it would take to build organisations that learn rather than blame. True safety is not the absence of incidents. It is the presence of trust, learning and systems that help people make the right choices. Welcome to the Building Doors podcast. Look, as I told you, I've been doing a bit of a deep dive. You gave me some homework and episodes to listen to and things like that from your safety-orientated podcast, and also one of the, I think it was the Pine River.
Oh, the Pike River, yeah.
Pike River disaster as well.
Yep.
And yeah, I went in a rabbit warren, with so many concepts. But before we get stuck into it, I first want to find out why you chose this path. That always fascinates me. Why forensics, why is safety behaviours and all of the work you've done?
So I started off, I'm a structural engineer by training.
Yeah.
So started off as an academic first, came out to Australia from Ireland and started to work on old structures, not new structures, but old structures which didn't comply with the new codes because they'd been built in a different time. And the question was, how do these structures actually work and how do they fail and how would we know about that sort of stuff? So I really got into understanding how structures actually work in the real world, which is quite different to how we actually design them and the assumptions we make when we design them. And weirdly, that skill set leads you to forensic engineering, because when something falls down, you have to work out what was it doing before it fell down. Yeah. Got into forensics, really loved, trying to identify the causes of failures and why they happen, cause of defects as well. And that led me to looking at all the major failures, because when you start looking at, how do structures fail, you start doing your research and how does it happen all over the world. And what's really interesting is we keep repeating the same technical mistakes over and over and over again in engineering. And the question becomes, well, why do we do that? And the answer is that there's behind all these technical causes of failure, there's organizational causes. And these organizational causes allow these technical issues to present themselves, make their way through a design and construction process basically, and eventuate in a failure. And what's really interesting is once you get to the organizational failure level, you can look at other industries, because we tend to set our organizations up the same. We're the same as people. So it shouldn't surprise us that the organizational cause of failure in hospitals, for example, is the same as in engineering. And of course, unlike engineering, a lot of other professions have done a huge amount of work. I should say structural engineering. A lot of professions have done a huge amount of work to look at why these organizational causes present themselves. How do you identify them? How do you address them and deal with them? So that's how I suddenly have started to do less and less engineering and more stuff that was pure organizational, which is what eventually led me to look at fatalities in the mining industry.
So I'm fascinated by what are the mistakes, because you mentioned we're making the same mistakes again and again. And I was interested as well, you looked at different industries, health, aviation, lots of different industries. What are they? What are we doing again?
Oh, there's so many and they're so repeatable. So one of my favorite ones of them is called Normalization of Deviance, which is a very funny word. But this came out of the Challenger disaster at NASA. And it was a major cause there. And what it is that, we all set off to do something, or we design work to happen in a certain way. And then suddenly we discover, oh, there's something not quite right, something we didn't expect. And this usually worries us initially. But the really interesting thing is that when we see these things that worries us and nothing bad happens, and then we repeat that process and nothing bad happens again, then very quickly we decide, oh, that risk that I was worried about, that's actually not a real risk. I don't need to worry about it anymore. What happens is we say that because nothing has happened, that's proof that nothing will ever happen.
Oh.
Now, there's a really good analogy for this, which is, let's say you want to go and join some sort of social club to do some sort of hobby, and it's in a dodgy part of town where the risk of being mugged is reasonably high. So there's a risk. And let's say you look up the police stats, and the police stats say, yeah, there's a reasonable chance of getting mugged here. You go the first night, you don't get mugged, you don't see anyone getting mugged. The more times you do that, the less risky it will appear to you.
Yes.
And what's fascinating is it's not that the risk has changed. We don't tend to go back to check the police stats to see if there's been a decrease. What happens is your perception of the risk changes. And because your perception of the risk changes, you decide that risk is no longer something you should be worried about. The deviance, the difference between what you expected and what is actually happening, that has been normalized. So this is where the term comes from. And fascinating with NASA, because this contributed to the Challenger disaster. They had problems, short version, they had problems with the O-rings on the space shuttle, very worried about the problems. Over time, everyone got comfortable with these problems and decided they weren't really a problem until January 1986, it was a problem. All the ingredients for failure were necessary. They'd just been lucky every other time. What's fascinating is 7 years later, we have the Columbia disaster. Entirely different cause of failure. That case, it was a shuttle breaking up and re-entry. It was a heat shield problem. But the investigation report found that normalization played another role in that failure. And the investigation report basically says is that NASA fixed the technical issues, but never fixed the organizational issues. And when you don't fix the organizational issues, you just get new technical issues that are able to present themselves later on.
Okay, so this is then making me think, when we look at, if there's a project that's got really good safety stats,
yes,
and they proudly celebrate they are a really safe
yes,
site, and, which we want to celebrate success. But one of the things I've heard you talk about and I want to talk about is, what's the danger in that as well, if we celebrate that and there's this complacency that can set in?
Yeah, so there's so many things we can talk about just on this subject. But I suppose start at the beginning. We celebrate the low number of injury statistics.
Yes.
The lost time injury frequency rate, or the total recordable injury frequency rate. And we say as organizations, well, if that's low or if that's trending down, well, that's proof that the system's working. How we're managing safety is working. The problem is that inside those safety metrics, what you're usually counting, and basically, for anyone who's not familiar, these are injury rates where you count the number of injuries, and there's very strict definitions of what the injuries are per certain number of hours worked. The big issue is that the injuries that make up those stats tend to be the slips, the trips, the falls, and the hand injuries. Now, I'm not attempting to minimize the impact of those injuries, but what's really important is that the causes of those injuries are different from the causes of the things that will actually kill you. That means that the things we use to control the slips, trips, and falls, those controls, they're different to what we have for controls when it comes to fatality prevention and serious accident prevention. So when we're measuring the slips, trips, and falls and the number of those, that is got no correlation. It is no measure at all of how well we're managing our fatality risk or our serious accident risk because the causes and the controls are different. It's a wonderful analogy, and it's not mine, which is, if an airline industry said to you that they were managing the risk of a plane crash by attempting to minimize the slips, trips and falls of baggage handlers, you'd think that was comical in the extreme. Yet we do that every day in mining and construction in Australia. We count the number of slips, trips and falls, and we think that tells us something about how well we're managing our major fatality risk.
Okay, why are we doing that? So if it's a consistent thing that we're doing, why? Why do you think that companies are falling into this trap of measuring their success on those metrics?
There's a number of reasons. The biggest, I would say, is education. I think, when you talk to senior people in these industries, executive level, board level, they genuinely believe that counting those things is meaningful. So I think that's a really important point to make. Secondly, there is such a strive among organizations to compare each other to one another. So counting the number of slips, trips and falls you have, using these injury metric rates, they use them to compare one company's performance to another. So they like metrics that are common, that are easy to calculate, clearly defined, that allow these comparisons. And then there's just the genuine problem, I think, of there's nothing else to measure. That's the perception. And there's a really great line, I can't remember who said it, but they said, when you can't measure what's important, you make what you can measure important. And that's what they've done here. We're in a real issue with it now because it's got its way into ESG funding. So they are the metrics that we measure companies from a safety perspective. Largely, process safety is a little bit different, but we won't go there. But for personal safety, fatality risk, that is measured by these metrics, and that's embedded in how ESG funding works. So I think that's a real issue because now you've got board members who are being told by the people who provide the funding that these measures are important. And what we say is that really what you should measure, and the problem is for companies that it will differ from company to company, is how effective are the controls that prevent fatalities and serious accidents. That's what you should be measuring. And if you don't have some sort of measurement like that, then you are essentially flying blind with respect to those major risks.
So one of the things I've heard you speak about before, and I want to link it in while you're talking about these control measures around safety incidents and complacency, and it's a HRO that what do you call the term?
High reliability organization.
High reliability organization. So would a high reliability organization have the right controls, or how do we define that for me so that we know maybe what the end goal is for companies?
Yeah. So I'll go back to the review we did. So one of the key findings out of the review was, what is killing people in the Queensland mining industry? And what came up in almost every fatality was ineffective controls. Now, what that means is controls that the organization put in place to manage the risk. But those controls didn't work as effectively as they should have and didn't prevent the fatality. So we sort of make it's a cheeky phrase, but it seems to stick with people, that it's not hazards that kill people, it's ineffective controls. And when we're talking about controls, at a simple level, fall from height, we could be talking about using a harness. We could be talking about always having guardrails, all that sort of stuff. So the way you manage your fatality risk is you make sure that the controls that are the most important ones to stop someone dying are in place and effective. Now, to do that, you have to identify what they are. You have to put performance standards in so that that they will work as you intend them to work. And then you have to constantly monitor them. So that's where we're trying to get to with controls. Now, the difference with high reliability organizations and the rest of us is a fascinating one. So a high reliability organization is one that works in an incredibly hazardous industry, but has very few incidents. And there's the really famous example. Do you want to have a crack at the famous example?
No, go for it. Yes, I love stories.
Yeah,
Tell me.
The famous example is airline companies. If you think about it, we think flying is incredibly safe.
Yes.
And it is. It really is. But if you stop and think of how nuts it is that you climb into an aluminium tube with 200 other people and then you fly up in the air. And guess what? When you get up there, there's going to be loads of other aluminium tubes full of people as well. You know, the level of risk is massive, yet we manage that really well. And we manage it because these organizations have certain characteristics, and those characteristics have become sort of synonymous with these higher liability organizations. So the really interesting question is, what do they do differently to the rest of us? You know, do they do compliance? We put a system in place and we make people follow that system. And when we do that, everything will be great. You know, do they just do that better than the rest of us? And the answer is not necessarily. They do something different. So yes, they have systems. Yes, compliance is a major part of what we do. Just think of pilots with checklists and all that sort of stuff. But what they do is they don't believe you can build a perfect system. What they believe is you try, but then you put in practices, we can talk about them if you want, that give them constant feedback as to where the system that they believe is effective is actually not effective. And then they act on that information to make the system stronger. So it's not like a set and forget. We've put a system in, this is the rules, follow the system. And as long as someone follows the system, we'll be safe. Instead, they go, here's the best system. And then these are all these practices we have inside our organizations to get information flowing back up through the organization to understand what the system's not working as well as it should be. And then we get a chance to do something about it. And I love to combine this concept of these, you know, defining your controls, your critical controls that will stop people dying, and then putting this learning layer on top of it to say it's not enough to define your critical controls to keep people from getting killed. You have to have a learning approach to understand where will they not be effective, how will they fail to work properly. You put all that together, and that's where the magic starts to happen.
I'm going to ask because I'm fascinated. How do you get that feedback? So because often we'll go, oh, we've got the governance, we've got the risk management, we've got the processes. If people follow their safe work method statement, if they follow the processes, then we will have kept people safe, and then you know that's our obligation. But how do you check that system is what are those examples that they do in aviation to identify if there's a potential failure of the processes designed to keep people safe if there's something not going right?
Yeah. So it's really fascinating, and it's really fascinating because it's really counterintuitive in many ways. So one of the things they do, it's all, if you think of what you just described, that is information largely flowing top of the organization to the bottom in one direction. So what they're doing is they're putting the practices to gets information flowing back to tell you where that system's not working. So some of the practices they have are fascinating. So they're really big on, one of them is called chronic unease, which just sounds worse than it is. But it's basically this system property where you go, we've designed the best system we can, but we don't think it's perfect. So let's get the information flowing back. They want incident reports. They want hazard reports. They really want near-miss reports, where something could have gone terribly wrong, but they just got lucky. Most organizations, that information terrifies them because that's information telling them, my system doesn't work as well as I thought it should. That's very, very confronting. HROs actually go and hoover up that information because they know that's the information that tells them, well, if we've had a near miss and it could have been very bad, well, our system really didn't function as well as we thought it would at all. Where, why, in what ways? So if you say that that's a key approach, there's a couple of bits to that are really important. One, you have to have a really good environment for people to report. They have to be, they have to know you want the reports genuinely. You have to give them enough risk competence to spot where, this is a problem and I got to report it up. You got to then investigate the right ones. Like most organizations don't investigate their near misses very well. They investigate their actual incidents. But if you go back to your actual incidents tends to be the slips, trips and falls. So investigating them is telling you nothing about the health of your controls for fatality prevention, but that's often where the near misses are. So suddenly you can get into the near misses and you can go, if you investigate them properly, wow, we had several controls that didn't work properly. The last one did, and that's what that's what stopped it being really bad, or we just got lucky. But there's a wealth of information in here where a system doesn't work. Let's use it. But what happens is organizations reward lower numbers of reports. So they reward the TRIFR going down, the LTIFR going down. And if you think about that, that makes complete sense. We want to have less incidents, so let's reward our people when we have less incidents. What you're actually telling your people is we're going to reward you for reporting less incidents.
Yep.
So you get fewer reports. Now, if you think of that, getting fewer reports is the opposite of what we're talking about in HRO, where you actually want more reports, because that tells you where your system's not working. So, and then you get to the level of, when it's extreme, the zero harm approach, which is deadly, because you're saying to your people, I don't want reports of anything. Now, that's not what you think you're selling your people, but that's what they're hearing. So what will they do? They will not report stuff back up. So one of the things we do with organizations is, if you really want to understand how they're tracking, go and look at the reports. Go and look at the incident reports, the hazard reports, the near miss reports. Look at what they're not telling you. Because that's the stuff that they either are not recognizing or they're afraid to tell you for whatever reason. It's incredibly powerful. Particularly look at the things that, are the reports you're getting things that they have no other choice but report? Because it's really obvious there's a problem. Or are you getting a load of near misses being reported where, they could probably have got away without telling you that, but they still told you? That's a much healthier culture. So, but it's really hard to move an organization who's focused on, I want to keep my injury metrics down, to say that's an admirable pursuit. But all your people are hearing is they want all reports down. So you're blinding yourself to the information that you need.
Okay, so this is fascinating and not surprising when you think around blame culture, psychological safety, and what we want to drive to know about what's really happening that's dangerous, that kills people on projects before it's too late.
Yes.
So if we're talking about, so let's move into blame culture.
Yep.
Because it's prevalent, yes, in safety, but it's also prevalent, like things actually go wrong in projects, and, you see projects losing money, and I've been in many lessons learned where it's like, well, why did this project lose money? And there are sometimes often patterns to that as well. But then generally someone is blamed, whether it's public or not. I've seen behind the scenes, it's like, well, we didn't have a strong enough commercial manager, so we lost money, or the project director wasn't across it. Like there's always, I felt a lot of the time in lessons learned, it's digging around to find, well, who's maybe at fault here, or multiple parties. So my question around that, and I'm getting to my point, is around the psychological safety and also this blame culture. How do we get a culture where people don't feel like if I report that, I could be held accountable? There's that fear sometimes, even though, I've heard you speak about before that we should expect things to go wrong, but we kind of don't.
We kind of don't know. And I think it comes from, so if you go back to the concept that we're designing people to keep our system safe, and as long as people follow the system, then we won't have an incident and everything will be fine. So it shouldn't surprise us then that the first thought of people inside the organization is, well, it must be because somebody followed the system. Let's find the person who didn't follow the system. And then probably let's make an example of that so that other people in the organization understand the importance of following the system. Yeah. So what you'll often see, if you just stay with incidents, but you're absolutely right, you can extend this to project management, whatever you want. Yeah. The investigation basically concludes, this is the person who didn't follow the procedure. This is the issue. And this is and what does the recommendation say? Retraining, change the procedure to be more specific, whatever. And the problem with that is that you're sort of saying the system isn't the problem. But the system usually is the problem, because the system is rewarding people for behaving in a certain way and penalizing them for behaving in different ways. So what you find is, yes, people don't follow procedures, but you need to understand why they're not following the procedure. And there was some research that came out of the regulator in New South Wales, fascinating. They found, yes, there's all these instances where people didn't follow the procedure. But when you actually go and you talk to the rest of the crew, it wasn't that this person was one bad apple. It was the whole crew don't follow the procedure like that. The whole crew have a different way of doing it. And then the question becomes, well, why would the whole crew have a different way of doing it? Well, that's a system property. It's not a bad apple property. So it's Andrew Hopkins who talks a lot about organizational safety. And he says, that human error or violation is never the end point of an investigation. It's the starting point of your investigation. And you need to then go beyond that to say, what is it in our system that has rewarded someone for behaving in this way, to take these risks, to make these decisions? Because that's the bit you ultimately have to change. Because if you don't change that, you can fire someone, but the new person you hire, they'll fall into exactly the same pattern because the system rewards them for doing that. So I say to senior people, there's a lot of really simple things you can do to have a look at how you think your system is working. Grab your investigation reports for the last year. How many times is pretty much the ultimate conclusion that this person stuffed up and training or changing a procedure is what needs to come out of this? I just say, if you really want your investigations of your incidents to give you value, your first question as a senior leader should be, what were the controls that we as an organization believed were in place, and why were they not effective in preventing this incident? And then what are we proposing to do to change those controls to make them stronger? And do we think that will actually work? That's what investigations should be about. Not about blame. They should be about learning. Problem is, it's very difficult, almost impossible to do both. You have to choose between one or the others. Lots of ways we can talk about, there's a just culture model, which we can talk about if we want to talk about it. It's that fundamental, I would say, philosophical shift that has to happen at a management level to go, we didn't design a perfect system. We want to know why it doesn't work. We want to make it better. You got to shift to there.
And it's interesting. So if we look at human nature, for example, I don't know if you've ever looked on community pages and there'll be a car accident and there's always people commenting before anyone knows what has happened.
Absolutely, yes.
And they're going, definitely drinking or speeding involved.
Yes.
And they're straight to blaming the individual. So it's so interesting where there is like this psychological shift that we need with people to start to look beyond just looking at the individual, because the reality is one of the things you spoke about in your episode, which I really like, is expecting, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but expecting things to go wrong.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Tell me more about that as well, because it even just, yes, it's around safety, but it's also around just project life and construction in general. We don't expect things to go wrong in safety, and we often don't expect things to go wrong when we're doing projects. We're shocked that a massive project has lost money. And I'm like, really? We're shocked? Yeah. A lot of massive projects have lost money. Like, this is not a new thing for us. Yeah. So, yeah.
I think it goes back to this whole thing of, we've got a risk. So what do? We build a system, and the system manages the risk, and the system will work, and that'll be great. And we don't expect anything to go wrong. I think particularly around safety, because people go, it is unacceptable for something to go wrong. So I won't even think about that. And if you sort of step through how people do that, they go, well, what are the hazards? What are the controls we're going to have? And it doesn't matter whether this is project controls or physical controls for fatality risk. Does that control, if it's in place, reduce the risk to an acceptable level? Yes, it does. Tick, tick, tick. Great, we've got a good system. Let's get on with it. But we know all these systems drift, and the way things work now is not the way things will work in 6 months or a year. And those controls may not be as effective as they should be, either in project land or in health and safety land. But we don't necessarily go back and check them. We might check that they're compliant, but compliant and effective, that gap starts to open up after a period of time. So we expect that. Now, the really interesting thing I sort of say to senior leaders is, if you focused on health and safety risk the way you thought about financial risk, you'd do it really differently. So, for example, if I said to you in financial risk, you're allowed one metric to run the company. They go, well, that's impossible. And you go, well, you do that in safety. You pick the LTIFR or the TRIFR and you believe that tells you enough. Why don't you have more? The other thing is that when something goes wrong, you plan out your budget for the year. You don't wait till the start of the next financial year to see how you did over the last year. You check it every month. Yeah. And when you find a difference, you say, "Ooh, this system, this plan isn't as effective as we thought it was. So let's have a look at why. Let's learn why." we don't necessarily just sack the manager immediately to make an example of them. We find out, well, what went wrong? What was different between the plan and what actually happened? How do we close the gap? What's the deviation? How do we manage this? Okay, let's try this, and this. Let's see if it improves. So there's just a totally different philosophy when it comes to managing financial risk that we do not have when it comes to health and safety risk. And it's much more, if you go to higher liability organizations, they're taking a lot more of those concepts. Understand you can't have a perfect system. Understand you need feedback where your system doesn't work. Understand that you need a range of metrics to tell you where things are how things are actually working. And you need to just be, in touch all the time with how well that system has worked. They call it a sensitivity to operations. You just need to be really in touch. This is not set and forget. And I think safety is almost kind of set and forget. We've designed the system, we've put it in place. Yes, we'll go audit it, but it's safety. It's our first priority. Of course it works. And this is where a lot of the issues come from.
Okay, so now I'm also thinking, if we want to create, because culture is often across multiple levels, and the leader or the project director, the general manager, the executive leader sets an example or sets a tone on the way that they lead that can flow onto the rest of the organisation. What are we looking for in leaders to drive a just culture? What are we actually looking for? I mean, even for myself, as a recruiter, as someone recruiting in this space, or just in general when we're looking at succession planning and looking at who is going to be able to lead projects. How do we look? Because I don't think we actively do. If you think about it, if we're often looking at a leader, we will look at financial metrics. Have they had profitable projects, successfully, worked with a client, led a team, all of that type of thing. What about safety leadership or leadership in that space? What are we looking for in terms of the type of behaviours we want to see?
I think it fundamentally comes back to understanding that you can't design the perfect system, and what information are you getting? And there's a number of things with that. There's have I got the right practices in place to get bad news to flow up through the organization so that we can help those in the front line start to meaningfully deal with it. There's the structure of the organization, which is terribly important. Again, going back to Andrew Hopkins, he has a wonderful book on structure where he basically says that how you structure an organization, particularly where your reporting lines go to, has a massive impact on safety. He makes this great line where, organizations look at what they centralize. That's the most important thing to them. If they centralize profit and basically say every part of this business is a separate business unit, profit is what we measure, but you're responsible for your own safety. You've got a tension there. And then he talks about McDonald's. He says McDonald's is franchise. It doesn't maximize, doesn't centralize profitability. It centralizes quality, because it knows that if you go into one McDonald's restaurant and have a bad experience, or an inconsistent experience, shall we say, what you expect, that will affect your likelihood to go into another one. So they centralize consistency, which is really, really interesting.
Yeah.
So one of the really simple things is, if you look at who's reporting to a CEO, have you got an independent safety line running all the way to the CEO? Because if you don't, then all the other lines are more important, regardless of whether you stand up at podiums and you say safety is your first priority. How would you know how safe you are if the voices that are coming to you, none of them include safety properly? So it's a really, really interesting thing. But how do we structure? All that really doing is saying, I want a real person telling me bad news.
Yeah.
I want them in the room. I don't want to hear it filtered through any of the other disciplines who are really important to the company. So I think a lot of it is, we see a lot of senior people who genuinely believe safety is a first priority. It's a very difficult thing to do. The best you can do is put a good system in, make sure people follow it, and keep an eye on your safety, on your metrics, and make sure they're going down. And we find that you get a lot of traction with leadership when they get the light bulb moment. Hang on, no. It's doing that, yes. But now what practices do I have to get bad news when that's not working? And what practices do I have to continuously improve that system? They move from this, I would say, this place of sort of, I've done my best, now I keep my fingers crossed, to this place of, I've got agency. I can look at what is the outcome of my investigation reports. I can see if we're making the system better or we're just blaming the individuals. They can start to see and get real world information coming back to them, which is allowing them to make the system stronger.
And from a leader perspective, then it's that willingness to be curious and open-minded and looking at continuous improvement. So, you're trying to get somebody that is not so set, not looking for a set and forget, but understands that they need to be curious about what's really going on and have that direct line to safety from their business.
Yes.
Because you're right, if there's multiple layers diluting the information before it gets to the CEO, how much are they really getting?
It's exactly right. I mean, like, it's a really interesting thing.
This is fascinating.
The way we structure
deep dive.
Yeah, it is a bit interesting. We're getting pretty geeky on it, which is great. I would say that the way we structure our companies is designed to have good news flow upwards. Everyone wants to tell their boss they're doing a good job.
Yeah, true.
And what that means is that the default for an organization is for bad news not to flow up. And you meet a surprising number of senior people who'll say, I've got an open door policy. I'll know whether something's going wrong.
Yeah, they do say that.
And you go, well, no, you won't, because there's all these layers below you who are telling their boss they're doing a good job. So you're going to be pretty blind on some of your big risks if you're not getting that information coming up to you, telling you why the system's not working. That means you actively have to put in practices to get bad news. You have to work to get bad news. Bad news will not come in the natural state. And that's, I think, a key thing for leaders. And what we see, you go read any of the big disaster reports, you read Pike River, you read any of the big ones. You have a board who are looking at injury stats, which, as we said, are telling them nothing about their major risk. And you have an attitude that, well, I had a view that I was waiting for people to tell me if something was wrong. My people would come and tell me if there was a problem. And the answer is, no, they don't. That's not what happens inside our organizations. And that's why we say, chronic unease, this high reliability organizational concept, is not about constantly worrying. Nor is it telling your frontline people, this is what it turns into. You need to have more chronic unease because you're in a very hazardous environment. Don't get complacent. It's not that. It's as a leader going, I've done my best to get a good system, and I'm constantly looking for what we call the weak signals that system isn't working. Here's a really useful, I think, example. Imagine you are getting hazard reports and you look at those hazard reports and you're getting no hazard reports or no near misses on dropped objects from people working at heights. You can interpret that in two ways. You can say, we've really got our dropped object hazard of this hitting someone on the head and killing them. We've really got that under control. Or you can say, it's really worrying me that I'm getting no reports of something that I know has to be happening inside the organization. So I now need to work out why I'm not getting that information and what practices, what changes I need to make to get that information. So this is this lovely counterintuitive aspect about health and safety that I find fascinating. Then a lot of people will pick the first interpretation. Clearly we've got that risk under control. That's the one thing I don't need to worry about because I'm getting no reports on it. HRO would say, I'm worried because I'm getting no information on that. I'm risk blind to that particular hazard.
Okay, so now I'm fascinated around how you reinforce. So if we then know, we want to know the information, we want to know where there has been, dropped from heights, we want to have the reporting data to show us that, something serious could happen and there has been a pattern. So we actually counterintuitively want more near misses to be reported back. So how do we then reward? Because, people avoid having uncomfortable conversations at the best of times. You see it all the time where people want to ask for a pay rise or they've got to have a difficult conversation with their manager about some bad news. Like, how many times have people hidden that a project is losing money only to get to the end and go, what? So often. So my question is, what are the contingencies, the positive reinforcement? What are the things that the leaders need to be doing across those levels to drive a reporting culture or just culture?
Yeah. So, and you absolutely use the right term there, across many levels. And this is the way to think of it is you've got a system problem, so you have to have a system-wide solution. And let's just take near miss reports and follow them through the process. So when you make a near miss report, you're really saying there's something wrong with the system here, particularly the controls in the system that should have been okay. Step one, if there's a metric, a KPI that penalizes you for that, and many organizations have this, you're not going to report those. You're going to find a way to hide them. So you got to get rid of the metrics to stop you doing that. Then as that goes up into the organization, everyone's going to be busy investigating the slips, trips and falls because they resulted in actual injuries to people. And then you come along to the already burdened investigation team and say, I want you to investigate this incident that was a near miss. Nothing bad actually happened, but I think we can really learn a lot about where our system was weak. I'm too busy. I don't need that. I'm flat out investigating the things that I have to investigate. There's a great story of an organization. I'm not sure how true this is, but it's a great story where if you had over a 20-litre spill, this is in a hazardous environment, over a 20-litre spill, you had to do an ICAM investigation, so a time-consuming investigation. And that was a level 4 investigation that you had, or the level 4 incident. You go looking in the level 3 incidents and they're full of 19-litre spills. That's clear evidence that somebody just doesn't want to do the investigation. So you find these incredible nuggets in there. So what you actually need to do is you need to make sure your investigation team is resourced properly. You need to ensure that making sure your investigation methodology doesn't discourage people from actually wanting to do investigations is the next step. So you get that fixed. So now then you now need a priority tool to say, well, okay, how do you decide where to spend your time? What these near misses come in? Which ones are you actually going to focus on and pick to investigate? But you want to get want to investigate the ones with the most learning potential. So you need some sort of tool and methodology to do that and put it into the system, or else everyone investigate what's easy. So you don't want that. So you've got that system working pretty well, but now you got to make sure that your CEO doesn't go, oh my goodness, we've had 5 dropped objects. We're out of control. So you have to change how that response works to say, no, we're obviously not good. We're having these incidents, but it's great that we know we're getting them because now we can work out why we're getting them and we can do something about it. So you got to get all that messaging right. The board have to be comfortable that they've got 5 new, dropped objects popping into their chart. And as someone said to me once, no board can cope with a safety graph going up, so there's a lot of education around that.
Yeah.
You can keep going there, but let's just jump to the other side, right? So now your people have took a risk. They've told you about something that's worrying or concerning, or this near miss that happened that could have been bad. How you respond in terms of real action really matters. If you come back to them with an even more complex procedure, all they're going to say is, wow, you've just, the old procedure clearly didn't work, and now you've given me another one. And this is meant to help me. How is that going to work? Or you get retrained, and the retraining is largely you need to be more careful the next time. How is that helpful? You report a few of them and you get that experience. You don't want to do that again because it's rubbish. That's not making things safer. So management coming back, working through meaningful solutions to make the controls better, to stop that occurring again, with you involved in the process in a way that actually makes the system better and safer for you as the individual. That's when you'll start to go, it is absolutely worth my time, my effort to report these near misses because it's leading to real meaningful change, practical change that's making things safer for me and the other people around me. Now, we've just took one example there of reports, but you can see all the bits of the system have to work in unison to produce the outcome, the benefit that you're looking for there, a stronger system. And if just one of those doesn't work, you're in trouble because that will break the system. You'll only need one situation where someone gets a bad disciplinary outcome for them to go, be very careful what you report. I did the right thing. I ended up in this situation. So it's a really, really tricky balance to get all this right. Time consuming, costs money, and it takes time. We would say, it's not months before you see a change in an organization as you start to do these things. It's years because you have to rebuild trust. That takes time for people to realize, wow, they're serious. They're serious. They do want to know when the system doesn't work and they do want to fix it.
Mm. When you're dealing with multiple layers, can you share with me a good example, like a good news story where you've been able to or seen a company be able to turn this around, just so I can see, because I can see how hard it is, but I can also see from everything you've spoken about, it 100% makes sense. I see it makes sense from a safety perspective, but I also see it makes sense. You drive these behaviours, this psychological safety and these behaviours in the safety side, you also start to drive those behaviours in terms of profitability in other areas too. There's a flow on.
Absolutely. And that's why they're called high reliability organizations. The word safety is not in the title.
No, I noticed that.
And that's because they understand safety is the outcome. It's not the system itself. The system, the way of thinking about making your system better produces outcomes, which is, things generally get, they get safer, but they get more productive, all of those sorts of things. Yeah, there's been some really good news stories to watch, or to talk about. There's one organization we did quite a bit of work with where, they started to, let's work out what our major hazards are. Let's work through in a very systematic way what our critical controls are. Let's define our performance criteria for that. Let's involve all areas of the business in that. And that's really powerful because when you've got frontline people sitting in a workshop working out, well, what are the critical controls that keep them safe on this job, doing this task or protecting them from this risk, that gets very real for them. And that has a flow-on effect through the organization. And then when you actually go and you check those controls and you make sure that they actually are in place and they are working, and you bring everyone's risk competence up as to the importance of these controls and the role of these controls, then suddenly everyone's speaking a common language now about what we're trying to do. And you're not in this situation of just top-down information flow where here is the system and you will comply with it. It's much more of an approach that you've got information going in all directions, both to build the system to keep people safe. What are the controls? How do we check them? What's the performance standards for them? But everyone understands that from the front line to the board. Mm. And you can suddenly have conversations at the board where you're saying, here are your critical controls and here is the health of them. These are ones we're concerned about, where we think we can make them stronger. And these are the sort of things we think we need to do. It just flips the entire conversation. And it's when an organization gets their head round, it's not hazards that kill you, it's ineffective controls. Everything we do should focus on confirming the effectiveness of controls. That's our mission, top to bottom. That you see that shift and it becomes how they do the work.
It also, what I really like about it also starts to get them thinking. And I'll give you an example. So my husband studied to be a pilot and I've always enjoyed landing with the plane until one time he said to me, just to stir me up, did you know that landing a plane is actually a controlled crash? I was like, what? And he said, well, it is. He's like, we are taught in terms of when he was studying to be a pilot. He's like, there's a lot of things you're taught to make sure that the landing is good, but it's actually a really dangerous part of the flight. So everyone thinks when they're landing,
I'm here. Yeah.
I'm here. And then we, of course, had this conversation backwards and forwards, and I can't remember the detail because he did engineering and aviation. But around what are those mechanisms in place and things like that. And I had never, ever thought before about it. Like I hadn't even thought about it. And how many people that when you're asking about controls have never thought about it because you've done it so many times before. Yep. Well, I've been on planes so many times. I had never thought, and I still curse him today, that sometimes we'll have a landing. I was like, well, that was just a very bumpy controlled crash. So we don't think about these things because they're just part of normal for us too.
And that's a wonderful example because I'd always, if you ever see the footage, it's terrifying. When they bring the
never flying again.
They bring the pilots up in the training and they put them into a stall. And then they teach them how to get out of a stall, when the airplane is plummeting towards the ground out of control. That's your sort of a wonderful HRO, chronic unease example of this is what a bad thing is. Rather than designing the system so it'll never happen, we will try and design the system so it'll never happen, but we'll train you for when it does happen. We'll show you how to get out of it. And that's the sort of thinking we need to bring to the systems we have to keep people safe in every other situation. You cannot assume the system is going to work, but we can check and confirm the effectiveness of some of the most important bits in it to keep us safe. Where we've gone wrong with this is that, where the industry, shall we say, multiple industries are right now, is there's so much of what they call safety clutter. There's just so much safety stuff, paperwork, admin, that it's very difficult, I think, for people to say, in all this stuff, what is the stuff that stops me dying today? What are the 2 things or the 3 things I need to do today, or that I need to make sure is in place and working today to stop me dying? And the beauty of taking a critical control approach and moving to controls is you're asking that question. You're saying we've got a lot to do and all these things to do. Yes, sure. But what are the things that really matter and are they working?
Love it. So a question I always ask, and it'd be interesting to hear your answer, for all the work you're doing in this space, both professionally and personally, what's the legacy you want to leave for your life's work?
Oh, that's a heavy question.
I know.
That's a very heavy question.
Someone said it's like their tombstone question. I was like, well, it's not that deep.
I think I'm really interested in why systems fail, whether it's a technical engineering problem, whether it's an organizational problem. And I really like to understand why these systems fail. I really like to explain to people why these systems fail so that we can learn and avoid these sort of failures again. And I think the big legacy I would like is for people to understand that these systems that they're in control of, they're not these top-down set and forget systems that you can just put in place and they will guarantee you the outcome you want. They are systems that require constant attention, care, refinement to make them better. And when you look at the organizations who do that well, they really are incredible. So I get very excited about challenging people about why they think things go wrong and what actually matters in preventing those things going wrong.
I can tell, and it's fascinating, and I've really enjoyed it. I'll share links in our podcast to your podcast as well that you've done, because it's fascinating deep dive, and you've done a really good job on producing that. It's fantastic. I wanted to ask you a few personal questions. We have the rocket round now. So coffee or wine?
Oh, wine.
He says he's got a long black beside him. Cats or dogs?
Cats.
Favorite holiday destination?
Oh, I don't know. That's hard. I'd have a few. Yeah, I don't know. Actually, that's probably too hard.
That's a hard one. Yeah. It's like, it's not my wheelhouse. Where's one that you've recently been? How about that?
I was in Rio last year and it blew my
Nice.
mind.
Okay.
Rio
Amazing.
is one of those places where you've got a vision in your head of what it looks like. And it's even better than you imagine when you go
Wow.
and see it. It's mind-boggling place visually. It's incredible.
I'll add that to the bucket list.
Add that to the bucket list.
And podcasts that you listen to.
Yes.
Yes.
The Rest is History. It's probably the big one.
Yeah, I'm sure you'd like that one.
Yeah, that one's that one. And they've recently started a book club, which is you just read through the books and you go, oh yeah, I love all of these books. So you now can listen to them talking about their favorite books. So I'd highly recommend that. So it's very, very good. There's a podcast on writing that I listen to called How I Write.
Cool.
They're probably some of the ones I'm spending most of my time
deep diving
listening to at the moment. All the Right Movies, that's a really good one as well.
Okay.
Big deep dive on movies. Yep.
And what makes you feel like you're home?
Books, probably.
Really?
Yeah, books and reading. Yeah.
Do a lot of reading?
Yep.
Yeah, I can tell. Thank you so much for coming on as a guest. I really enjoyed, and I'm sure people want to learn more. Where can they connect with you? What's some of the resources available for them?
Yeah, jump on the website, bradyhaywood.com.au. We're also on YouTube, so we've got lots of stuff on YouTube. So just look up Brady Haywood there. And LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Look, I really enjoyed it, and I'm probably going to be thinking about different ideas and thoughts about it, for weeks to come. So thanks so much for coming.
No, thank you, Lauren. Absolute pleasure.
If this episode gave you new insights, don't let them go to waste. Take action. Apply them. And if you want more insider strategies from the best in construction and infrastructure, make sure to subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the leaders who open the most doors aren't waiting for opportunities, they're building them.